Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 22 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Seattle Kraken, in which the Sharks have lost 8-5, so a very massive score for this game, which is quite interesting because it's not as though these shot totals were necessarily super inflated on either side. It's just that win chances did happen for both of these two teams. Those chances usually were quite good and ended up in the back of the net. The defensive play in this game was not necessarily amazing, and this one is very familiar to one that the Sharks played just a few days ago against the Detroit Red Wings, where they also gave up 7 goals. Tonight it was 8 goals, but even scored a good amount for themselves. And the major issue for that one was goaltending. The major issue here tonight, maybe not entirely goaltending, but definitely sort of goaltending based, as the San Jose Sharks still managed to put up 5 goals here, which should be on pretty much every normal night enough to win a National Hockey League game. But for some reason, that did not end up being the case here for the Sharks. This one started off very well for themselves. Logan Couture, just a few minutes into this game, managed to make it 1-0 San Jose, and it was quite interesting, of course, because the Seattle Kraken are rolling with Martin Jones in net. It was only a couple of years ago where the Sharks bought out Martin Jones. Last year, he was a backup for the Philadelphia Flyers and didn't do particularly well. This year, he ended up being a sort of backup for the Seattle Kraken, but because of multiple injuries to their goaltending core, he actually ends up being the starter for them, and he has done very well in that position, so it's nice to see him have that renaissance here with Seattle. However, some of that Martin Jones-ness is still in him, and I'll get to that one a bit later, but also for this goal, giving up one in the first few minutes of this game is pretty on style for Martin Jones. The Kraken would manage to get a 5-on-3 for themselves and immediately score, so that could hurt the Sharks' penalty killing percentage a decent bit as Burakovsky tied up the game, but then a 4-on-3 for the Sharks themselves, as they managed to score a very nice one-timer goal from Timo Meier, his 10th of the season, to make it 2-1 San Jose. Now, in the second period, that's where things started to get away from San Jose on the offensive side of things, and where the defense just started to completely fall apart, because the first period for the Sharks actually wasn't too bad. It was pretty decent, and they, of course, outscored Kraken 2-1. But then 3 unanswered in that second period make it 4-2 Seattle. Eventually, the Sharks near the end of the second period would manage to get one back to cut the lead to 1 with Timo Meier's second goal of the game, but they would still be trailing heading into the third period. However, the San Jose Sharks this season, for whatever reason, have actually been pretty good when trailing going into the third period. They've quickly managed to actually tie up those games, and while they haven't always led to wins, as we saw the Detroit game a few games ago where the Sharks were down 2 goals going into the third, scored both of those 2 goals to tie it up, and then ended up losing. That again happens here tonight as Barabanov, just about a minute into the third period, tied this game up at 4, but then they give up 2 more goals to Seattle to make it 6-4. Meier gets his hat-trick goal, which puts it 6-5, but eventually a Beniers goal makes it 7-5, and the Sharks just don't have the ability to score in the 6-on-5 situation. 3 minutes left in the game, the Sharks pull that goaltender, they get their main guys out, but because there's so much north to south play as the Seattle Kraken continuously managed to clear this puck out, they're forced to go with their second unit, which is barely even a unit, featuring players like Bonino and Gregor and Ferraro and Benning, so nothing really ends up happening there, and eventually the empty netter makes it 8-5. Moving on to the players to talk about, we once again have the first line for the San Jose Sharks. There was that small blip a couple of games ago against the Rangers, but they are back firmly in the driver's seat. Timo Meier, I had already mentioned in the previous game how he was really on fire and really rolling, partly in thanks to the fact that he has really Erik Karlsson to kind of bounce off of. And while Erik Karlsson only managed to get a single assist here tonight, he definitely was involved with multiple of these San Jose Sharks goals, even if not necessarily on the score sheet. And Timo Meier was the beneficiary of that. 3 goals for himself puts him on 12 for the year. A very, very torrid pace to hit over 40 goals if he is able to continue that on this year, which of course would be a career high for himself. Tomas Hertl himself, I should mention also, gets, I believe, his 15th assist here tonight to go along along with, I believe, 5 or 6 goals, which puts him at just under the point per game mark, which is definitely nice to see. Certainly doesn't have necessarily as much of the flair that we have seen from Timo Meier, his line mate, but if Meier is going to be the one who constantly shoots the puck, which we have clearly seen he is one of the highest volume shooters in the entire league, Tomas Hertl sort of falling a bit more into that playmaking type of role isn't necessarily the end of the world, even if Tomas Hertl could technically be like a 30-plus goal scorer. We have seen that before in his career. Falling into a bit more of a playmaking role is not the worst thing that can happen. And then finally, the last line mate on this line, Kevin Labanc. It's quite interesting because it had been like 3 seasons where Labanc had been tried multiple times in top 6 roles and pretty much failing at them quite consistently, and this time around that hasn't necessarily happened just yet. It's not the first time that we've seen Labanc have short-term success, but I usually expect that short-term success to last like 2 to 3 games and then eventually fall off. But it's been multiple games that Labanc has actually fit in well on this top line. So maybe once Meier and Hertl start to slow down a bit, if that does actually end up happening, it's very possible that it doesn't. Labanc will suffer for it. But right now he's fitting in quite well, and he's actually making some nice plays for himself. That pass on the Timo Meier hat-trick goal was very, very good. And you can see Meier really giving credit to Labanc for that in his goal celebration. When it comes to the second line of Barabanov, Couture, and Nieto, definitely a pretty solid game for these 3 players, contributing on the score sheet as Couture got the first goal of the game and Barabanov got the game-tying goal at the beginning of the third period, which was definitely nice to see, and probably one of the stronger lines on the defensive side of things here tonight for the San Jose Sharks, which isn't necessarily saying too much, considering the Sharks gave up 7 goals here tonight on a manned net with an 8th one on the empty net, but still a solid line for a solid game for the second line. The fact that the Sharks put up 5 goals is a testament to the Sharks offense being much improved over these past few games. On the third line, we have Cunnin, Bonino, and Gregor. We saw last game they actually played pretty well, I would say, against the Ottawa Senators. Here tonight against a significantly more difficult opponent like the Seattle Kraken, there definitely was some sort of regression. I would say there were some positives in their game, which is nice to see. I saw Bonino make a couple of decent plays. I saw Cunnin make a couple of decent plays. This line actually had 2 solid shifts, I would say, but more often than not, they found themselves turning pucks over and kind of in dangerous situations, and so it wasn't too good of a game for the third line. On the fourth line, we had, honestly, this fourth line hasn't been very good the past few games. It was a slight improvement here tonight. They had a couple of decent shifts, I would say. There was that bad giveaway from Lorentz that led to one of the Seattle goals. I believe that was from Bjorkstrand that made it 5-4, but Lindblom had this one particular shift early in the first period where he fed a nice pass to Karlsson, who hit his first of 2 posts here tonight. Another decent opportunity later on, so definitely a slightly improved game from the fourth line, but not anything to write home about. On the defensive side of things, this is obviously where things kind of fell apart here for the San Jose Sharks. The first player who I do want to mention is, of course, Erik Karlsson. Such an absolute give and take, risk and reward type of player. I have mentioned this so many times in his career with the San Jose Sharks, and it's really just been on full display as of late in that game against the Detroit Red Wings. Remember, that was a game where he had 4 points, and yet all at even strength, and yet still managed to be a -1. And here tonight, he puts up only 1 point, but he was on the ice for many of the Sharks' goals, and yet still a minus on the game. The thing is with Erik Karlsson, while he is like far and away the Sharks' best offensive defenseman, it's not even close, and likely their best player at this point, though that one is a bit more closer with Timo Meier, and he's potentially even the best offensive defenseman at the moment in the entire league. On the defensive side of things, there's always that look to try and convert it on the offensive side, and so Karlsson at this point, the struggles are definitely there defensively. We've seen him multiple times get skated past. We've seen him multiple times stumble, just falling on the ice, which is very surprising when that on the Bjorkstrand goal, when the fourth line did have that giveaway, Karlsson kind of falls over, expecting it to have gone offensively, which allows Bjorkstrand all that time in front of the net to make his play, and it was a very nice play he did. And just generally, Karlsson can sometimes be a bit of a passenger in some of these plays, and so he is still a net positive for the San Jose Sharks. No one can actually argue that, but there is definitely a reason why the Sharks have been at times giving up a lot of these goals, and Erik Karlsson not necessarily being the best defenseman, yet still playing not the best defenseman defensively, and yet still playing half of the game may be one of those reasons. But another was that even the Sharks' more defensive type of guys did not have the best of games. Vlasic, I thought, had a bit of a weaker game, and in particular, Ferraro stood out. Two of those goals, the third and fourth goals for the Seattle Kraken, were directly responsible here for Mario Ferraro. He kind of subscribes to the school of thought that Burns did when he was with the San Jose Sharks, which was that you can play sound defensively, but when you yourself make the mistake, you sort of overcompensate trying to make up for that mistake. So for instance, on the third goal, we saw Mario Ferraro give this puck away, and then in his overcompensation to try and make up for that misplay, he ends up just completely losing his man in this situation, which leaves his man completely all alone. And then on the fourth goal, a similar type of situation. Ferraro needs to be watching. Even I know this is a 6-on-5 because of the delayed penalty, so it is still outnumbered, but there should be no reason why Alexiak is literally just standing alone on the ice, completely on the right side of Kakkonen, enough time in the world to do anything he wants and to pick his spot for that shot. Ferraro needs to be a bit more active in that and a bit more aware in that type of situation. So definitely a rough game throughout here for the San Jose Sharks defense. Many giveaways, many missed coverage opportunities, and that is a big reason why the San Jose Sharks gave up 7 goals here tonight on a manned net. The other big reason, of course, is the Sharks goaltender Kakkonen coming off of a very impressive performance against the Ottawa Senators. I had thought there would be a decision between Kakkonen and Reimer, but it turns out Reimer actually was injured here tonight as Arundel ends up backing up Capo Kakkonen. So really no decision. Kakkonen gets the start, and it wasn't particularly good. I would say earlier on, Kakkonen necessarily wasn't at fault for some of these goals, but later on, in particular, I look at the Beniers goal. Yes, this is Beniers all alone with time in front of the net, but in a 6-5 type of game, you're maybe hoping that your goaltender, who's already led in 6 goals, can come up with a big save to keep the Sharks within 1, and that just doesn't actually end up happening. And so any night where you let in 7 goals, your goaltender has to take some responsibility for that, and Kakkonen wasn't that great. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Friday, where they will take on the Los Angeles Kings, a team in their division. So if you are still hopeful of the San Jose Sharks potentially making the playoffs, even with this loss here tonight, that would be a pretty important win for the Sharks to get. Class dismissed.